in the steamy lowlands of Mexico's Gulf Coast, where ancient rivers carved their paths through fertile alluvial plains, one of humanity's most remarkable civilizations began to take shape over 3,000 years ago. The Olmec people, whose name means rubber people in the Nahuatl language, would become the mother culture of Mesoamerica, laying the foundational stones for all the great civilizations that would follow in their wake. The story of the Olmec begins not with grand monuments or colossal stone heads, but with the land itself. The Gulf Coast lowlands of what is now southern Veracruz and western Tabasco presented a unique environmental canvas unlike anywhere else in ancient Mexico. Here, where the Sierra Madre Oriental Mountains descended toward the Gulf of Mexico, countless rivers and streams created a vast network of waterways that deposited rich sediments across the landscape for millennia. The Coatzacoalcos, Tonal, and Grijalva rivers served as the arteries of this fertile region, their annual floods bringing life, giving nutrients that transformed the lowlands into some of the most productive agricultural territory in all of Mesoamerica. Unlike the arid highlands of central Mexico or the limestone karst of the Yucatan Peninsula, the Olmec heartland was a world of abundance. Tropical rainforests carpeted the higher elevations, their canopies alive with howler monkeys, jaguars, and countless species of birds whose brilliant plumage would later inspire Olmec artisans. The forests provided not only game and exotic materials, but also the rubber trees that would give the Olmec their eventual name. In the lower elevations, vast wetlands and seasonal lakes created perfect conditions for early agriculture, while the rivers themselves teemed with fish, turtles, and caimans that supplemented the diet of early inhabitants. The geological richness of the region extended far beyond its fertile soils. The Tuxtla Mountains, rising like islands from the coastal plain, contained deposits of basalt that would prove crucial to Olmec monumental sculpture. These volcanic peaks also harbored sources of obsidian, that volcanic glass so prized throughout Mesoamerica for its razor, sharp edges and ritual significance. Perhaps most importantly for the development of Olmec elite culture, the region contained deposits of serpentine and other green stones that the Olmec would transform into exquisite jade. Like ornaments, symbols of water, fertility, and divine power. The earliest inhabitants of this region were likely small bands of hunter-gatherers who arrived sometime during the Archaic period, perhaps as early as 7,000 years ago. These pioneering peoples found themselves in what must have seemed like a natural paradise. The rivers provided reliable sources of fresh water and transportation routes, while the diverse ecosystems offered an abundance of wild resources. Archaeological evidence suggests that these early inhabitants developed sophisticated strategies for exploiting the seasonal rhythms of their environment, following the migrations of waterfowl, harvesting wild plants during their peak seasons, and establishing temporary camps along riverbanks and lakeshores. The abundance of resources available to these early peoples was truly extraordinary. During the dry season, which typically lasted from November through April, they could venture deep into the forests to hunt deer, peccaries, and tapirs, while also gathering wild fruits, nuts, and medicinal plants. The forest canopy provided homes for numerous species of monkeys whose meat was prized for both sustenance and ritual purposes. Brilliantly colored birds like parrots, toucans, and quetzals offered not only protein, but also feathers that would later become essential elements in Olmec's ceremonial regalia. When the rainy season arrived, transforming the landscape into a vast aquatic environment, these early inhabitants shifted their focus to the rivers and wetlands. The seasonal floods brought massive runs of fish upstream to spawn, creating opportunities for intensive fishing that could provide protein for months to come. Waterfowl arrived in enormous flocks, their eggs and meat providing additional sources of nutrition. The wetlands themselves became productive gathering grounds for aquatic plants, mollusks, and crustaceans that added diversity to the early Olmec diet. The transition from this mobile lifestyle to settled village life did not happen overnight. Instead, it was a gradual process that unfolded over many centuries, driven by both the abundance of the environment and the innovative spirit of its inhabitants. By around 3,500 years ago, small permanent settlements began to appear along the major rivers of the region. These early villages were typically located on natural levees or slightly elevated terraces that provided protection from seasonal flooding, while maintaining easy access to the water and the rich alluvial soils of the floodplains. Archaeological investigations at sites like San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, which would later become the first Great Olmec Center, reveal that even these earliest permanent settlements showed signs of careful planning and environmental management. The inhabitants constructed elaborate drainage systems to control water flow during the rainy season, built raised platforms for their houses to stay above flood levels, and began the systematic modification of their landscape to support larger populations. These early drainage systems represent some of the most sophisticated hydraulic engineering in the ancient Americas. The Olmec builders created networks of stone-lined channels that could redirect floodwaters away from residential areas while simultaneously channeling them toward agricultural fields that benefited from the nutrient-rich sediments. The engineering principles they developed during this early period would later be applied on a much grander scale in the construction of their great ceremonial centers. The abundance of the Gulf Coast environment allowed these early villagers to support population densities far higher than their contemporaries in other parts of Mexico. While highland peoples struggled with unpredictable rainfall and thin soils, the Olmec ancestors enjoyed the benefits of naturally irrigated fields that could support multiple crops per year. This agricultural surplus was the foundation upon which all later Olmec achievements would be built, freeing some members of society from the daily necessities of food production and allowing them to specialize in crafts, trade, and eventually, the creation of monumental art and architecture. The rivers that nourished Olmec agriculture also served as highways for trade and communication. Long before the Spanish arrived with their horses and wheeled vehicles, the waterways of the Gulf Coast connected Olmec communities to each other and to the wider world of Mesoamerica. Dugout canoes carved from massive cecropia trees could carry heavy loads of goods and people across vast distances, following river routes that extended from the Gulf Coast deep into the highlands of central Mexico and south toward the Maya regions of Guatemala and Belize. The construction of these dugout canoes was itself a remarkable technological achievement. Olmec craftsmen selected cecropia trees that could reach enormous sizes in the fertile lowland environment, some with trunks over 2 meters in diameter. Using stone tools and controlled burning techniques, they could hollow out these massive trunks to create vessels capable of carrying several tons of cargo. The largest canoes could accommodate crews of 20 or more paddlers, along with substantial loads of trade goods, making possible commercial expeditions that could travel hundreds of kilometers from the Olmec heartland. This riverine transportation network was crucial to the development of Olmec Civilization because it allowed for the movement of materials that were not available locally. While the Gulf Coast provided many resources, it lacked certain materials that would become central to Olmec elite culture. High-quality obsidian had to be imported from highland Mexico, iron ore for mirrors came from distant mountains, and certain types of precious stones were available only in far-off regions. The ability to transport these materials along river routes made possible the accumulation of exotic goods that would become symbols of power and prestige in Olmec society. The development of long-distance trade routes also facilitated the exchange of ideas and technologies that would prove crucial to Olmec cultural development. Contact with highland peoples introduced new techniques for working stone and metal, while interactions with groups to the south brought knowledge of different agricultural practices and artistic traditions. This cultural exchange created a dynamic environment of innovation and creativity that would characterize Olmec civilization throughout its history. As these early settlements grew and prospered, they began to develop the social and political structures that would characterize later Olmec civilization. Archaeological evidence suggests that by around 3,000 years ago, clear social hierarchies had emerged within Olmec communities. Elite residences, distinguished by their larger size, more elaborate construction, and accumulations of exotic goods, began to appear at major sites. These early elites were likely individuals who had gained prestige through their roles as successful traders, skilled craftsmen, or effective leaders in community projects like the construction of drainage systems or defensive works. The emergence of social stratification in Olmec society was closely tied to the control of key resources and trade routes. those individuals and families who could monopolize access to exotic materials or who controlled strategic locations along major rivers gained significant advantages over their neighbors. This process of social differentiation was gradual but inexorable, eventually leading to the emergence of powerful ruling dynasties that would transform simple farming villages into the magnificent ceremonial centers for which the Olmec are famous. The control of specialized knowledge also became a source of power and prestige in early Olmec society. Individuals who possessed detailed understanding of seasonal cycles, astronomical phenomena, and the properties of various materials gained influence that extended far beyond their immediate communities. These early specialists became the predecessors of the priest, astronomers who would play crucial roles in later Olmec ceremonial centers, combining practical expertise with religious authority to legitimize their positions of leadership. The environmental foundations of Olmec civilization extended beyond mere resource abundance to encompass a sophisticated understanding of ecological relationships and seasonal cycles. The Olmec developed what might be called an amphibious lifestyle, equally at home on land and water, that allowed them to exploit the full range of opportunities offered by their unique environment. During the dry season, they focused on activities like hunting, gathering forest products, and quarrying stone from distant sources. When the rains came and the rivers rose, they turned their attention to fishing, waterfowl hunting, and the cultivation of crops in the newly fertilized floodplains. This intimate relationship with their environment profoundly influenced Olmec religious and artistic expression. The natural world was not seen as separate from human society, but as an integral part of a cosmic whole in which humans, animals, plants, and supernatural beings all played interconnected roles. The jaguar, apex predator of the tropical forests, became a central figure in Olmec iconography, representing power, fertility, and the connection between the earthly and divine realms. Water serpents, inspired by the caimans that inhabited Olmec rivers, symbolized the life-giving power of water and the cyclical nature of seasonal floods. The seasonal rhythms of the Gulf Coast environment became deeply embedded in Olmec religious consciousness. The annual cycle of floods and droughts was seen not merely as a natural phenomenon, but as a cosmic drama involving supernatural forces that could be influenced through proper ritual observances. The timing of agricultural activities, ceremonial events, and major construction projects was carefully coordinated with these natural cycles, creating a religious calendar that integrated human activities with the rhythms of the natural world. The transition from simple farming villages to complex societies capable of creating monumental architecture and sculpture required more than just environmental abundance. It demanded new forms of social organization, technological innovation, and ideological systems that could motivate and coordinate the labor of thousands of people. The seeds of these developments were planted in the rich soils of the Gulf Coast lowlands, nurtured by the seasonal rhythms of flood and drought, and brought to fruition by the creative genius of the Olmec people themselves. The development of craft specialization was another crucial factor in the emergence of complex Olmec society. As agricultural surpluses freed more people from direct involvement in food production, individuals began to specialize in particular crafts and technologies. Stoneworkers developed techniques for shaping and polishing the hard volcanic rocks that were abundant in the region. Ceramic specialists created increasingly sophisticated pottery that served both practical and ceremonial purposes. Textile workers learned to process plant fibers and create elaborate fabrics that became symbols of status and wealth. The concentration of these specialists in particular locations created centers of innovation and technical excellence that attracted people from across the region. Young apprentices came to learn from master craftsmen, creating educational networks that preserved and transmitted technical knowledge across generations. The competition between different craft specialists drove continuous innovation and improvement in techniques and products, establishing standards of excellence that would characterize Olmec material culture. By around 1500 years before the Common Era, the stage was set for one of the most remarkable transformations in the history of the Americas. The small farming villages scattered across the Olmec heartland were about to undergo a revolution that would create the first complex civilization in Mesoamerica, establishing patterns of monumental architecture, artistic expression, and religious symbolism that would influence every subsequent culture in the region. The agricultural revolution that transformed Olmec society from simple farming villages into complex chiefdoms began with the domestication of maize. But it encompassed much more than the cultivation of a single crop. The Olmec developed what archaeologists call a diversified agricultural system that made use of every available ecological niche in their environment, from the fertile river floodplains to the forested uplands. This agricultural intensification not only supported larger populations, but also created the economic foundation for social stratification, craft specialization, and monumental construction. The centerpiece of Olmec agriculture was indeed maize, that miraculous grass that Mesoamerican peoples transformed through centuries of selective breeding into one of the world's most productive food crops. However, the maize that early Olmec farmers cultivated was quite different from the large, kerneled varieties that would later feed the great cities of the Maya and Aztec. Archaeological evidence from sites like San Lorenzo suggests that early Olmec maize had relatively small cobs and kernels, requiring careful processing to extract maximum nutritional value. The Olmec developed sophisticated techniques for preparing maize, including the use of lime processing that increased the bioavailability of essential nutrients and prevented nutritional deficiencies that plagued other agricultural societies. The process of nixtamalization, as this lime treatment came to be known, represented a remarkable technological breakthrough that had profound implications for Olmec society. By treating maize kernels with lime water derived from burned shells or limestone, Olmec cooks could dramatically improve the nutritional value of their staple crop while also making it easier to grind and process. This technique not only prevented pellagra and other nutritional diseases, but also created a more palatable and versatile food product that could be prepared in numerous ways. Alongside maize, the Olmec cultivated a diverse array of other crops that took advantage of different environmental niches and growing seasons. Beans provided essential proteins and helped fix nitrogen in the soil, while squash offered both nutritious flesh and useful containers from their dried shells. Chili peppers added flavor and important vitamins to the Olmec diet, while also serving as natural preservatives in the humid tropical climate. Root crops like manioc and sweet potatoes provided reliable sources of carbohydrates that could be stored for lean periods, and tree crops like avocado, cacao, and various palms supplied fats, proteins, and other specialized nutrients. The cultivation of cacao deserves special attention because it would become one of the most important trade commodities in ancient Mesoamerica. The Olmec were among the first peoples to recognize the value of cacao beans, both as a source of nutrition and as a basis for ceremonial beverages that played important roles in religious rituals. The preparation of chocolate drinks required sophisticated knowledge of fermentation, roasting, and grinding techniques that the Olmec perfected over many generations. These chocolate beverages became symbols of elite status and were often served at important ceremonies and diplomatic gatherings. The genius of Olmec agriculture lay not just in the diversity of crops they cultivated, but in their sophisticated understanding of how to manage different environmental zones to maximize productivity. In the river floodplains, they developed systems of raised fields and drainage canals that allowed them to control water levels and extend the growing season. These raised field systems, similar to those later used by the Maya in the Yucatan and the Aztec in the Valley of Mexico, involved constructing elevated planting surfaces separated by water, filled canals that provided irrigation during dry periods and drainage during floods. Archaeological investigations have revealed that Olmec raised field systems were remarkably sophisticated, incorporating features like check dams to control water flow, settling ponds to reduce erosion, and carefully engineered gradients that ensured optimal water distribution. The canals between raised fields served multiple purposes beyond irrigation and drainage. They provided habitat for fish, turtles, and waterfowl that supplemented the Olmec diet, and they facilitated transportation of agricultural products and other goods to market centers. The construction of these raised field systems required detailed understanding of hydrology, soil mechanics, and plant ecology that represented accumulated knowledge of many generations. Olmec engineers learned to read the subtle signs of seasonal water level changes, to predict the timing and intensity of floods, and to design drainage systems that could handle extreme weather events. This expertise became a form of specialized knowledge that enhanced the prestige and authority of those who possessed it. In the upland areas beyond the reach of seasonal floods, the Olmec developed different agricultural strategies adapted to well-drained soils and more predictable water supplies. Here they practiced what archaeologists call forest gardening, a system that involved selectively clearing forest areas while preserving useful trees and establishing diverse polycultures that mimicked natural forest ecosystems. This approach allowed them to maintain soil fertility and prevent erosion while producing a wide variety of crops, medicinal plants, and raw materials for crafts. The Olmec understanding of forest management extended far beyond simple slash and burn agriculture. They actively managed forest resources through controlled burning, selective harvesting, and the protection of particularly valuable trees and groves. Cacao trees, which produced the beans that would become the basis for chocolate and an important trade commodity, were carefully tended in forest gardens that provided the shade and humidity these plants required. Rubber trees were managed to maximize latex production, while various palm species were cultivated for their fruits, nuts, and fibers. The rubber produced from these managed forests became one of the most distinctive products of Olmec civilization. The latex harvested from rubber trees could be processed into balls used in the ritual ball games that were central to Mesoamerican religious life. The Olmec developed techniques for vulcanizing rubber that created durable balls with consistent bounce characteristics, technology that would not be rediscovered in other parts of the world for many centuries. These rubber balls became important trade items that spread Olmec influence far beyond their homeland. This intensive agricultural system required new forms of labor organization and social coordination. The construction and maintenance of raised field systems demanded collective effort that went far beyond what individual families could accomplish on their own. Communities had to cooperate in digging canals, building raised platforms, and managing water flow across large areas. This necessity for collective labor created opportunities for certain individuals to emerge as leaders and coordinators, laying the groundwork for the social hierarchies that would characterize later Olmec society. Archaeological evidence suggests that by around 1400 years before the Common Era, clear distinctions had emerged between ordinary farmers and a developing elite class that controlled access to the best agricultural lands and coordinated large-scale construction projects. Elite residences from this period are distinguished not only by their larger size and more elaborate construction, but also by their strategic locations overlooking important agricultural areas and transportation routes. These early Olmec leaders likely gained their positions through a combination of agricultural expertise, organizational skills, and perhaps religious authority that allowed them to coordinate the complex seasonal rhythms of their agricultural system. The development of food storage technologies was crucial to supporting larger populations and more complex social organization. The Olmec created elaborate granaries and storage facilities that could preserve agricultural surpluses for months or even years. These storage systems used a combination of techniques, including underground pits lined with stone, elevated platforms that protected stored goods from flooding, and ceramic vessels sealed with natural resins that prevented spoilage and insect damage. The agricultural surplus generated by these intensive farming systems had profound implications for Olmec society. For the first time in the region's history, significant numbers of people could be freed from direct involvement in food production and could specialize in other activities. Skilled craftsmen emerged who devoted their time to creating the elaborate jade ornaments, obsidian tools, and ceramic vessels that would become hallmarks of Olmec material culture. Professional traders developed who could organize and lead the long-distance expeditions necessary to obtain exotic raw materials from distant regions. Perhaps most importantly, the agricultural revolution created the economic foundation for monumental construction projects that would transform the Olmec heartland. The ability to feed large numbers of workers who were not directly involved in food production made possible the quarrying, transportation, and carving of the massive basalt blocks that would become colossal heads and other monumental sculptures. The organizational skills developed through managing complex agricultural systems provided the template for coordinating the even more complex logistics of monumental construction. The transformation of Olmec society through agricultural intensification also had important ideological dimensions. The successful management of water resources and seasonal cycles required detailed knowledge of astronomical phenomena, weather patterns, and ecological relationships. This specialized knowledge became a source of power and prestige for those who possessed it, contributing to the emergence of a priestly class that combined practical expertise with religious authority. The seasonal rhythms of agricultural life became embedded in Olmec religious ceremonies and artistic symbolism, creating connections between earthly fertility and cosmic order that would influence Mesoamerican thought for centuries to come. The development of food storage and processing technologies was another crucial aspect of the Olmec agricultural revolution. The ability to preserve agricultural surpluses through techniques like drying, fermentation, and underground storage allowed Olmec communities to support larger populations and weather periods of crop failure or other disruptions. Archaeological evidence from sites like La Venta reveals elaborate storage facilities that could hold substantial quantities of maize and other crops, providing the food security necessary for long-term planning and investment in monumental projects. The Olmec also developed sophisticated techniques for processing and preparing their diverse array of crops. They invented the metate, the stone grinding platform that would become ubiquitous throughout Mesoamerica for processing maize and other grains. They mastered the art of nixtamalization, the lime processing technique that made maize more nutritious and easier to digest. They developed methods for extracting oils from various seeds and nuts, for fermenting beverages from fruits and grains, and for preserving meat and fish through smoking and drying. The creation of fermented beverages held special significance in Olmec society, serving both nutritional and ceremonial purposes. Fermented drinks made from maize, cacao, and various fruits provided important vitamins and minerals while also serving as safer alternatives to water in areas where contamination was a concern. These beverages also played crucial roles in religious ceremonies where their mildly intoxicating effects were believed to facilitate communication with supernatural forces. These technological innovations in food processing and storage were not merely practical developments, but had important social and cultural implications. The control of food processing facilities and storage areas became another source of power for emerging elites. The ability to host large feasts featuring elaborately prepared foods became a way of displaying wealth and status. The sharing of processed foods and fermented beverages became central to religious ceremonies and social gatherings that reinforced community bonds and hierarchical relationships. As Olmec agricultural systems became more productive and reliable, they supported not only larger populations but also more complex forms of social organization. Villages grew into towns, and towns began to develop the specialized districts and monumental architecture that would characterize later Olmec centers. The success of their agricultural revolution created the conditions for the next great transformation in Olmec society, the emergence of complex chiefdoms and ceremonial centers that would establish the Olmec as the first great civilization of Mesoamerica. The emergence of complex society among the Olmec represents one of the most remarkable transformations in the prehistory of the Americas. Between approximately 1500 and 1200 years before the Common Era, the successful farming communities of the Gulf Coast lowlands underwent a dramatic social and political revolution that created the first complex chiefdoms in Mesoamerica. This transformation involved not just changes in social organization and political structure, but also revolutionary developments in art, architecture, religion, and technology that would establish patterns followed by all subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations. The catalyst for this transformation was the development of extensive trade networks that connected the Olmec heartland to distant regions across Mesoamerica and beyond. While the Gulf Coast provided many resources, Olmec elites developed an insatiable appetite for exotic materials that could only be obtained through long-distance exchange. Obsidian from the volcanic highlands of central Mexico was essential for creating the sharp tools and weapons that were both practical necessities and symbols of status. Iron ore from distant mountains was needed to create the polished mirrors that played important roles in Olmec religious ceremonies. Jade and other green stones from sources in Guatemala and Costa Rica became the most prized materials for creating the elaborate ornaments that distinguished the Olmec elite from common people. The organization of these long-distance trade networks required new forms of leadership and social coordination that went far beyond anything previously seen in the region. Successful trading expeditions demanded detailed knowledge of routes and resources, the ability to negotiate with foreign peoples, and the organizational skills necessary to coordinate the efforts of dozens or even hundreds of participants. The individuals who possessed these capabilities naturally emerged as leaders within their communities, accumulating wealth and prestige that allowed them to sponsor increasingly elaborate construction projects and ceremonies. The logistics of long-distance trade in ancient Mesoamerica were extraordinarily complex, requiring careful planning and coordination across vast distances and diverse environments. Trading expeditions from the Olmec heartland might travel for months, following river routes upstream into the highlands or trekking overland through dense forests and across mountain passes. These journeys required detailed knowledge of seasonal weather patterns, the locations of friendly settlements where traders could rest and resupply, and the political situations in distant regions where valuable resources could be obtained. Archaeological evidence from San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, the earliest Great Olmec center, reveals the dramatic impact of long-distance trade on local society. By around 1400 years before the Common Era, this site had been transformed from a simple farming village into a major ceremonial center covering several square kilometers and supporting a population of several thousand people. The site was dominated by a massive artificial plateau, over 1 kilometer long and rising more than 40 meters above the surrounding floodplain, that served as the foundation for elaborate residential and ceremonial complexes. The construction of this artificial plateau represents one of the most impressive engineering achievements of ancient America. The Olmec builders moved an estimated 2 million cubic meters of earth to create this elevated platform, using only human labor and simple tools. The logistics of this project required the coordination of thousands of workers over many years, suggesting the emergence of powerful leaders capable of mobilizing and directing massive collective efforts. The plateau was not simply a pile of earth, but a carefully engineered structure with internal drainage systems, retaining walls, and precisely graded surfaces that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering and soil mechanics. The engineering techniques used in constructing this artificial plateau were remarkably advanced for their time. The Olmec builders understood the importance of proper drainage in preventing erosion and structural failure, incorporating networks of stone, line channels that directed water away from critical areas. They used different types of fill materials in strategic locations, placing heavier stones and clay in areas that needed to bear greater loads, while using lighter organic materials in areas where drainage was more important than structural strength. On top of this artificial plateau, the Olmec constructed the first monumental architecture in Mesoamerica. Stone platforms, courtyards, and residential complexes were arranged according to careful plans that reflected both practical considerations and religious symbolism. The largest structures were aligned with astronomical phenomena, particularly the movements of the Sun and Venus, suggesting that Olmec leaders possessed sophisticated knowledge of celestial cycles that they used to legitimize their authority and coordinate community activities. The astronomical alignments built into Olmec architecture were not merely decorative, but served important practical and religious functions. The precise orientation of buildings and courtyards allowed Olmec priests, astronomers to track the passage of seasons and predict important dates in the agricultural calendar. These astronomical observations also provided the basis for religious ceremonies that reinforced the connection between earthly rulers and cosmic forces, legitimizing political authority through association with divine powers. The residential areas at San Lorenzo reveal clear evidence of social stratification that had developed far beyond the simple distinctions between successful and unsuccessful farmers. Elite residences were not only larger and more elaborate than common houses, but were constructed using entirely different materials and techniques. While ordinary people continued to live in simple houses made of perishable materials like wood, thatch, and adobe, The elite occupied substantial stone structures with elaborate drainage systems, paved floors, and sophisticated architectural details. The contrast between elite and commoner residences at San Lorenzo was striking in its magnitude. Elite houses covered areas of several hundred square meters and included multiple rooms arranged around central courtyards, while commoner dwellings typically consisted of single rooms of less than 50 square meters. Elite residences featured stone foundations, plastered walls, and carefully engineered drainage systems, while common houses were built directly on the ground using perishable materials that left few archaeological traces. The accumulation of exotic goods within these elite residences was truly remarkable. Archaeological excavations have uncovered caches of obsidian tools and weapons, polished iron ore mirrors, elaborate jade ornaments, and imported ceramics that demonstrate the extent of Olmec trade networks and the wealth of their ruling class. Some elite burials contained hundreds of jade ornaments along with other exotic materials, representing wealth that would have required the labor of many people over extended periods to accumulate. The jade ornaments found in elite contexts at San Lorenzo represent some of the finest examples of lapidary art ever created in ancient America. Olmec craftsmen developed techniques for working these extremely hard stones that would not be surpassed by later Mesoamerican civilizations. They could drill precise holes through jade beads using hollow reed drills and abrasive powders, create intricate relief carvings using stone tools and patient grinding, and polish finished pieces to mirror, like perfection using techniques that remain imperfectly understood today. Perhaps the most impressive evidence of emerging Olmec complexity was the beginning of monumental sculpture traditions that would become the most recognizable features of Olmec civilization. The earliest colossal heads at San Lorenzo date to around 1300 years before the Common Era and represent a revolutionary development in Mesoamerican art. These massive sculptures, carved from basalt blocks weighing up to 20 tons, required not only extraordinary artistic skill, but also the organizational capabilities necessary to quarry the stone from distant sources, transport it over many kilometers, and coordinate the work of master sculptors. The creation of colossal heads involved a complex sequence of operations that demonstrates the sophisticated organization of Olmec society. First, suitable basalt boulders had to be identified in the Tuxtla Mountains, over 60 kilometers from San Lorenzo. These massive stones then had to be quarried using techniques that involved controlled heating and cooling to crack the rock along desired lines. The rough stone blocks were then transported to San Lorenzo, probably by river during high water seasons, using large rafts and hundreds of workers to manage the enormous weight. The colossal heads themselves provide important insights into Olmec social organization and political structure. Each head appears to represent a specific individual, presumably a ruler or other important leader, rendered with distinctive facial features, headdresses, and other identifying characteristics. The investment of enormous amounts of labor and resources in creating these portraits suggests that Olmec society had developed concepts of individual leadership and political authority that were quite different from the collective decision-making that characterized earlier village societies. The artistic skill required to create these colossal heads was extraordinary by any standard. Olmec sculptors had to work with extremely hard basalt using only stone tools, yet they achieved levels of naturalistic representation and artistic sophistication that rival the best sculpture of any civilization. The faces carved on these monuments show subtle variations in expression and physiognomy that suggest they were indeed portraits of real individuals rather than generic representations of rulership. The artistic traditions that emerged during this period of Olmec development were not limited to monumental sculpture, but encompassed a wide range of media and techniques. Olmec craftsmen became master workers in jade and other green stones, creating intricate ornaments, ritual objects, and artistic masterpieces that demonstrated technical skills equal to those of any civilization in the world. They developed sophisticated ceramic traditions that produced both utilitarian vessels and elaborate ritual objects decorated with complex iconographic programs. They mastered the working of obsidian, creating not only practical tools but also ceremonial objects of extraordinary beauty and technical perfection. The ceramic traditions that developed during this period show clear evidence of increasing specialization and artistic sophistication. Early Olmec potters created vessels with highly burnished surfaces that achieved almost metallic sheens, decorated with incised designs that required great skill and patience to execute. Some ceramic vessels were clearly designed for ceremonial use, featuring elaborate sculptural elements and iconographic programs that communicated complex religious and political messages. The iconographic system that emerged in Olmec art during this period established symbolic conventions that would influence Mesoamerican religious and artistic expression for over 2 millennia. The were jaguar, a supernatural being that combined human and feline characteristics, became a central figure in Olmec religious art and appears to have represented concepts of transformation, power, and the connection between earthly and divine realms. Water serpents, inspired by the caimans that inhabited Olmec rivers but transformed into supernatural beings, symbolized fertility, rainfall, and the life-giving power of water. Birds, particularly raptors like eagles and hawks, represented the celestial realm and the connection between earth and sky. The development of this sophisticated iconographic system required not only artistic skill, but also complex theological concepts that could be communicated through visual symbols. Olmec artists created a visual vocabulary that could convey abstract ideas about the nature of divine power, the structure of the cosmos, and the relationship between rulers and supernatural forces. This symbolic system became so influential that elements of it can be recognized in the art of virtually every subsequent Mesoamerican civilization. These iconographic traditions were not merely decorative, but served important functions in legitimizing political authority and reinforcing social hierarchies. Elite individuals adorned themselves with jade ornaments carved with supernatural imagery that identified them with divine powers and cosmic forces. Ceremonial objects used in religious rituals displayed iconographic programs that communicated complex theological concepts and reinforced the special relationship between rulers and supernatural beings. The emergence of complex ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo also involved revolutionary developments in urban planning and landscape architecture. The Olmec did not simply build structures where convenient, but created carefully planned environments that integrated architecture, sculpture, and natural features into unified artistic and religious statements. Courtyards, plazas, and processional ways were arranged to create dramatic settings for public ceremonies and to control the movement and experience of visitors to these sacred spaces. The planning principles evident at San Lorenzo demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how architectural spaces could be used to create psychological and emotional effects. The approach to the ceremonial center was carefully choreographed to build anticipation and awe, with visitors passing through a series of increasingly impressive spaces before reaching the most sacred areas. The placement of monumental sculptures was calculated to create maximum visual impact while also serving practical functions, like marking important locations and controlling access to restricted areas. The water management systems at these early ceremonial centers were particularly sophisticated, involving not only the practical considerations of drainage and water supply, but also symbolic and religious dimensions. Elaborate systems of stone-lined drains, artificial ponds, and water features created aquatic environments within these centers that evoked the watery underworld of Olmec cosmology. Some scholars suggest that these water features were designed to create specific acoustic effects that enhanced the impact of religious ceremonies and public gatherings. The symbolic importance of water in Olmec religious thought cannot be overstated. Water was seen as the source of all life, the medium through which supernatural forces could manifest in the earthly realm, and the pathway between different levels of cosmic reality. The elaborate water management systems at Olmec ceremonial centers were designed not only to serve practical purposes, but also to create sacred landscapes that embodied these religious concepts. The development of these complex ceremonial centers required new forms of craft specialization and technological innovation. Skilled architects and engineers emerged who could plan and coordinate large construction projects. Master sculptors developed who could transform massive blocks of stone into works of art. Specialized craftsmen appeared who could work exotic materials like jade and obsidian into elaborate ornaments and ritual objects. The concentration of these specialists at major centers created environments of intense creativity and technical innovation that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with available technologies. The social and political structures that emerged to support these developments represented a fundamental transformation in human organization within the region. The simple egalitarian societies of earlier periods gave way to complex hierarchical systems with multiple levels of status and authority. At the top were paramount rulers who controlled access to exotic goods, directed major construction projects, and served as intermediaries between human communities and supernatural forces. Below them were various grades of nobles, priests, and officials who managed different aspects of these complex societies. Skilled craftsmen and traders occupied intermediate positions, while the majority of the population consisted of farmers whose agricultural surplus supported the entire system. The political structures that emerged during this period were probably based on what anthropologists call complex chiefdoms, societies led by powerful individuals whose authority was based on a combination of personal charisma, control of resources, and religious legitimacy. These early Olmec rulers were not yet the divine kings who would later rule Maya and Aztec cities, but they possessed far more power and authority than the village leaders of earlier periods. These emerging complex societies were not isolated developments, but were connected through extensive networks of trade, communication, and cultural exchange that extended across much of Mesoamerica. The Olmec became the first people in the Americas to create what might be called a civilization in the full sense of the term. With monumental architecture, sophisticated art traditions, complex religious systems, and hierarchical social organization. Their achievements established patterns and precedents that would influence every subsequent civilization in Mesoamerica, earning them recognition as the mother culture of this remarkable region. The influence of Olmec civilization extended far beyond their homeland in the Gulf Coast lowlands. Olmec traders, missionaries, and perhaps conquerors carried their distinctive artistic styles, religious concepts, and technological innovations to distant regions throughout Mesoamerica. Archaeological evidence of Olmec influence has been found in sites from central Mexico to the Pacific coast of Guatemala, demonstrating the remarkable reach of this early civilization. The transformation of simple farming villages into complex ceremonial centers represented more than just social and political change. It reflected a fundamental shift in how people understood their relationship to the natural world, to each other, and to the cosmos itself. The Olmec had created something entirely new in the Americas, a form of civilization that would serve as the foundation for all the great cultures that would follow in their footsteps. Their legacy would endure for over 2 millennia, influencing the development of Maya, Zapotec, and Aztec civilizations and establishing Mesoamerica as one of the world's great centers of human cultural achievement. The great ceremonial center of La Venta emerged from the tropical landscape of Tabasco around 1200 BCE, marking the beginning of the most spectacular phase of Olmec civilization. Rising from the swampy lowlands like a vision from another world, La Venta represented something unprecedented in the Americas, a massive complex of pyramids, plazas, and sacred monuments that would serve as the template for all future Mesoamerican cities. The site covered over 200 hectares, making it one of the largest urban centers in the world at that time, a testament to the organizational capabilities and religious devotion of the Olmec people. The landscape itself seemed to have been chosen by the gods for this sacred purpose. The Olmecs selected this location not merely for its strategic advantages, but for its profound spiritual significance. The site lay at the confluence of several waterways, creating a natural island that the Olmec understood as a representation of the primordial earth emerging from the cosmic waters. Ancient Olmec priests would have recognized in this geography a perfect mirror of their creation myths, where the world itself was born from the union of earth and water, sky and underworld. The centerpiece of La Venta was the Great Pyramid, known today as Complex C, which towered 34 meters above the surrounding landscape. This massive earthen structure, built in the distinctive fluted cone shape that would become characteristic of Olmec architecture, required the movement of over 100,000 cubic meters of earth and clay. The pyramid was not simply a monument to human ambition, but served as the axis mundi, the sacred center that connected the earthly realm with the heavens above and the underworld below. Its precise orientation to magnetic north demonstrated the sophisticated astronomical knowledge of its builders and their deep understanding of cosmic principles. The construction process itself was a sacred act that unfolded over generations. Each basket of earth, carried to the growing pyramid, was blessed by priests who understood that they were not merely building a structure, but creating a living mountain where the gods could dwell among mortals. The workers who labored on this monumental project were not slaves, but willing participants in a cosmic drama, contributing their strength and devotion to the creation of something that would endure for millennia. The rhythm of construction followed the agricultural calendar, with the most intensive building phases occurring during the dry season when farmers could be released from their fields to participate in this sacred work. The pyramid's fluted design was far more than an aesthetic choice. Each of the 10 radiating ridges represented one of the sacred directions recognized by Olmec cosmology, including the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 intercardinal directions, and the vertical axes connecting Earth to sky and underworld. The spaces between the ridges created channels that directed rainwater in specific patterns, transforming the pyramid into a massive water management system that demonstrated the Olmec mastery of hydraulic engineering. During the rainy season, water would cascade down these channels in precisely controlled torrents, creating a spectacular display that reinforced the pyramid's role as a sacred mountain where the rain gods dwelled. The construction of La Venta required unprecedented levels of social organization and resource mobilization. Thousands of workers labored for decades to create this monumental complex, moving massive basalt blocks from quarries over 100 kilometers away in the Tuxtla Mountains. These enormous stones, some weighing more than 20 tons, were transported across rivers, swamps, and jungle terrain using only human power, wooden rollers, and rope. The logistics of such undertakings reveal a society capable of organizing and sustaining large-scale cooperative projects with sophisticated systems of labor management, resource allocation, and technical expertise. The journey of each basalt block from quarry to ceremonial center was itself a ritual pilgrimage that could take months to complete. Teams of hundreds of workers would guide these massive stones along carefully prepared routes, stopping at designated stations where priests performed ceremonies to ensure the continued blessing of the gods. The blocks were not merely construction materials, but sacred objects imbued with the power of the volcanic mountains from which they came. Each stone carried within it the fire of creation, the molten essence of the earth's interior that the Olmec believed was the source of all life and power. The transportation routes, established for these monumental construction projects, created the first highways in Mesoamerica, permanent corridors through the jungle that would be used by traders, pilgrims, and messengers for centuries to come. These paths required constant maintenance, with crews of workers clearing vegetation, repairing bridges, and maintaining way stations where travelers could rest and resupply. The network of roads radiating out from La Venta connected the ceremonial center to quarries, agricultural areas, and distant trading partners, creating an infrastructure that supported both the construction of monuments and the broader economic activities of Olmec civilization. The sacred precinct of La Venta was carefully planned according to religious and cosmological principles that reflected the Olmec understanding of the universe. The site was laid out along a north-south axis, with the Great Pyramid at the southern end serving as the symbolic mountain where the gods dwelled. To the north lay a series of plazas, platforms, and smaller pyramids, each serving specific ceremonial functions within the broader religious complex. The entire layout mirrored Olmec concepts of cosmic order, with the sacred center representing the point where the 3 levels of existence, heaven, earth, and underworld, intersected. The northern plaza complex was designed as a microcosm of the Olmec universe, with each architectural element representing specific aspects of their cosmological beliefs. The rectangular plazas symbolized the ordered world of human society, while the circular platforms represented the cyclical nature of time and the eternal return of the seasons. Smaller pyramids marked the positions of important stars and constellations, allowing priests to use the built environment as a massive astronomical instrument for tracking celestial movements and predicting important religious festivals. The careful integration of water features throughout the ceremonial complex reflected the central importance of water in Olmec religious thought. Elaborate canal systems channeled water from nearby rivers through the heart of the sacred precinct, creating artificial streams that flowed around and through the major architectural elements. These waterways were not merely functional but deeply symbolic, representing the cosmic rivers that the Olmec believed flowed through all levels of existence. The sound of flowing water would have created a constant acoustic backdrop for religious ceremonies, reinforcing the connection between the ceremonial center and the aquatic realm of the gods. Within this sacred landscape, the Olmec created some of the most remarkable architectural innovations in the ancient world. They developed sophisticated drainage systems to manage the seasonal flooding that affected their lowland sites, using carefully engineered canals and underground conduits to channel water away from important structures. They pioneered the use of colored earth and clay to create striking visual effects in their buildings, employing red, yellow, and purple soils to create colorful facades and interior decorations. Most remarkably, they created massive mosaic floors using thousands of carefully cut serpentine blocks, arranged in intricate patterns that depicted jaguar faces and other sacred symbols. The serpentine mosaic floors of La Venta represent one of the most extraordinary achievements in ancient American art. These massive compositions, some covering areas of over 100 square meters, were created using tens of thousands of individual serpentine blocks, each one carefully shaped and fitted to create seamless images of supernatural beings. The largest mosaic depicts a stylized jaguar mask with flowing water symbols, executed with a precision that rivals the finest examples of Roman or Byzantine mosaic work. The creation of these floors required not only incredible artistic skill, but also sophisticated mathematical knowledge for calculating proportions and organizing the complex geometric patterns. The colored earth used in Olmec architecture was obtained from sources throughout Mesoamerica, demonstrating the extensive trade networks that supplied materials for the construction of ceremonial centers. Red ochre came from iron-rich deposits in the highlands. Yellow clay was imported from specific geological formations hundreds of kilometers away, and purple earth was created by mixing different mineral pigments according to closely guarded formulas. The use of these exotic materials transformed Olmec buildings into polychromatic displays that would have been visible from great distances, serving as beacons that announced the power and wealth of their builders. The religious architecture of La Venta reflected the complex spiritual beliefs that lay at the heart of Olmec civilization. The Olmec conceived of the universe as a multi-layered cosmos, with the earth floating on a primordial sea and supported by supernatural beings. The underworld was the realm of the dead and the source of agricultural fertility, while the heavens above were the domain of celestial deities who controlled the rains and seasons. The ceremonial centers served as sacred spaces where priests and rulers could communicate with these supernatural forces, performing rituals that maintained the cosmic balance and ensured the continued prosperity of their communities. The underworld held particular significance in Olmec cosmology as the source of both death and rebirth, the realm where the forces of decay and regeneration were locked in eternal struggle. Olmec priests understood that agricultural fertility depended on this cosmic battle, with the death of old plants providing the nutrients necessary for new growth. The ceremonial centers included elaborate underground chambers and tunnels that served as symbolic entrances to the underworld, spaces where priests could perform rituals of death and resurrection that ensured the continued fertility of their agricultural lands. The celestial realm was equally important in Olmec religious thought as the domain of the rain gods, whose favor was essential for agricultural success. The Olmec developed sophisticated knowledge of atmospheric phenomena, understanding the seasonal patterns of rainfall and the relationship between celestial events and weather changes. They created elaborate ceremonies designed to attract the attention of the rain gods and ensure adequate precipitation for their crops. These rituals often involved the sacrifice of precious goods, including jade objects and elaborate featherwork, which were burned or buried as offerings to the celestial powers. The Great Pyramid of La Venta was more than just a religious monument. It was a sophisticated astronomical observatory that allowed Olmec priests to track the movements of celestial bodies and predict important seasonal changes. The pyramid's alignment with magnetic north enabled precise observations of stellar movements, while its stepped construction provided multiple viewing platforms for different types of astronomical observations. The Olmec developed complex calendar systems based on their astronomical knowledge, creating the mathematical and conceptual foundations for the famous Maya long count calendar that would emerge centuries later. The astronomical observations conducted from La Venta required instruments of remarkable precision and sophistication. Olmec astronomers used polished obsidian mirrors to track the movements of Venus and other bright planets, carefully recording their positions relative to fixed stars and constellations. They developed water-level instruments for establishing precise horizontal references, allowing them to measure the angles of celestial objects with extraordinary accuracy. Most remarkably, they created stone alignments that functioned as massive sundials and star calendars, enabling them to predict eclipses, solstices, and other important astronomical events. The calendar systems developed by the Olmec were based on careful observations of multiple celestial cycles, including the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. They recognized that accurate timekeeping required the integration of different astronomical periods, leading them to develop mathematical techniques for calculating least common multiples and managing complex cyclical relationships. Their calendar incorporated both solar years of 365 days and ritual cycles of 260 days, creating a sophisticated system that could track time over periods of thousands of years. The religious ceremonies conducted at La Venta involved elaborate rituals of offering, sacrifice, and divination that required specialized knowledge and extensive preparation. Archaeological excavations have revealed massive caches of jade objects, polished mirrors, and other precious goods that were buried as offerings to the gods. These offerings were arranged in specific patterns that reflected cosmological principles, with jade representing water and fertility, hematite mirrors symbolizing the sun and fire, and serpentine objects embodying the earth itself. The scale and richness of these offerings demonstrate the enormous wealth that Olmec rulers could command and their willingness to sacrifice valuable resources to maintain divine favor. The preparation of ritual offerings was a sacred art that required years of training and initiation into the mysteries of Olmec religion. Priests learned to read the subtle signs that indicated which types of offerings would be most pleasing to specific deities, understanding that the gods had individual preferences and requirements that must be carefully observed. The timing of offering ceremonies was determined by complex astronomical calculations, with different rituals scheduled to coincide with specific celestial events or seasonal transitions. The jade objects buried as offerings at La Venta included some of the finest examples of lapidary art ever created in the ancient Americas. These precious artifacts were carved from jade imported from sources in Guatemala and southern Mexico, transformed by master craftsmen into objects of extraordinary beauty and spiritual power. The jade offerings included miniature figurines depicting gods and supernatural beings, elaborate masks and ornaments worn by priests during ceremonies, and abstract sculptures that embodied cosmic principles and natural forces. The construction and maintenance of La Venta required the development of specialized crafts and technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the ancient world. Olmec architects and engineers developed sophisticated techniques for working with different types of stone, creating tools and methods for quarrying, transporting, and shaping massive basalt blocks. They mastered the art of precision carving, creating sculptures and architectural elements with tolerances measured in millimeters. They developed advanced knowledge of materials science, understanding how different types of clay, sand, and organic materials could be combined to create durable construction materials suitable for the humid tropical environment. The stone working techniques developed by Olmec craftsmen represented a quantum leap in technological sophistication compared to earlier traditions in Mesoamerica. They learned to exploit the natural fracture patterns in basalt and other volcanic rocks using controlled percussion to split massive blocks along predetermined lines. They developed abrasive techniques using sand and water to achieve smooth, polished surfaces on even the hardest stones. Most remarkably, they mastered the art of hollow drilling, creating perfectly circular holes through solid stone using techniques that would not be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. The organic materials used in Olmec construction included sophisticated composite materials that combined plant fibers, clay, and mineral additives to create substances with specific engineering properties. They developed waterproof mortars using tree resins and volcanic ash, creating joints that could withstand the tropical climate for millennia. They used palm fibers and other plant materials to create reinforcing elements that prevented cracking in large earthen structures. Their understanding of material science allowed them to create buildings that were not only monumental in scale, but also remarkably durable and well adapted to their environment. The artistic achievements of the Olmec reached their pinnacle in the sacred precincts of La Venta and other ceremonial centers. Here, master craftsmen created works of unprecedented sophistication and beauty, establishing artistic traditions that would influence Mesoamerican culture for over 2 millennia. The Olmec developed distinctive styles of sculpture, painting, and decorative arts that reflected their complex religious beliefs and their deep appreciation for natural beauty. Their artistic legacy would provide the foundation for all subsequent Mesoamerican art traditions, from the elegant sculptures of the Maya to the dramatic murals of Teotihuacan. The training of Olmec artists began in childhood, with talented individuals identified early and apprenticed to master craftsmen who guarded the secrets of their trades. These apprenticeships lasted for many years, during which students learned not only the technical skills required for their craft, but also the religious and symbolic knowledge necessary to create works that carried spiritual power. The most accomplished artists were accorded high status in Olmec society, serving as advisors to rulers and priests and enjoying privileges comparable to those of nobles and warriors. The workshops where Olmec artists created their masterpieces were sacred spaces where the boundaries between craft and ritual were deliberately blurred. Artists began each day with ceremonies honoring the gods of their particular craft, seeking divine inspiration and blessing for their work. The tools used in artistic production were consecrated objects that were believed to contain spiritual power, passed down from master to apprentice in elaborate initiation ceremonies. The creation of important works was accompanied by fasting, purification rituals, and other religious observances that transformed the artistic process into a form of worship. The colossal heads of the Olmec represent perhaps the most iconic and mysterious achievements of ancient American art. These massive basalt sculptures, ranging in height from 1.5 to 3.4 meters and weighing up to 50 tons, were carved with extraordinary skill and precision from single blocks of volcanic stone. 17 colossal heads have been discovered to date, scattered across the major Olmec sites of San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes, each one unique in its features and expression, yet all sharing the distinctive artistic style that marks them as products of a single cultural tradition. The quarrying of the basalt blocks used for colossal heads was itself a monumental undertaking that required the coordination of hundreds of workers and the development of specialized techniques for extracting massive stones from volcanic outcrops. The Olmecs selected their raw materials with extraordinary care, choosing blocks that were free from flaws and possessed the ideal combination of hardness and workability. The quarrying process began with elaborate ceremonies designed to placate the mountain spirits and secure their permission to remove these sacred stones from their resting places. The transportation of colossal head blocks from the Tuxtla Mountains to the Olmec ceremonial centers required the construction of specialized equipment and infrastructure on a scale that rivals modern engineering projects. The Olmec built massive wooden sledges capable of supporting multi-ton loads, using techniques for lashing and reinforcement that distributed weight evenly across multiple support points. They constructed temporary bridges across rivers and swamps, created elevated causeways through difficult terrain, and established supply depots where work crews could rest and resupply during the arduous journey. The creation of these monumental sculptures required technical expertise of the highest order. Olmec sculptors worked with basalt, one of the hardest volcanic rocks, using only stone tools and abrasives to achieve their remarkable results. The process of carving a single colossal head would have required months or even years of intensive labor by master craftsmen who possessed intimate knowledge of stone working techniques. The precision of the carving is evident in the subtle modeling of facial features, the intricate details of headdresses and ear ornaments, and the smooth, polished surfaces that still gleam after more than 3,000 years. The carving process began with the creation of detailed models in clay or other soft materials, allowing artists to work out the proportions and details before committing to the permanent stone. These models were used to create precise measurements and guidelines that were transferred to the basalt blocks using sophisticated geometric techniques. The actual carving proceeded in stages, with rough shaping followed by increasingly detailed work that revealed the final form hidden within the stone. The final polishing phase required weeks of patient work with fine abrasives, creating surfaces so smooth that they seemed to glow with inner light. The tools used by Olmec sculptors were marvels of engineering in their own right, carefully designed implements that maximized the efficiency of working with extremely hard stone. They created hammer stones with precisely calculated weights and striking surfaces, chisels and points made from the hardest available materials, and abrasive compounds that could cut through basalt with remarkable efficiency. The most skilled craftsmen possessed collections of hundreds of specialized tools, each one designed for specific aspects of the carving process and maintained with the care accorded to sacred objects. Each colossal head appears to represent a specific individual, most likely rulers or other important figures in Olmec society. The faces display a remarkable range of expressions and features, from stern authority to benevolent wisdom, suggesting that these were portraits rather than generic representations of divine or mythological beings. The distinctive helmets or headdresses worn by the figures vary considerably, incorporating different symbols and decorative elements that may have indicated rank, office, or regional affiliation. Some scholars believe that these headdresses represent the protective gear worn during the ritual ball game that was central to Mesoamerican religious practice. The individualized features of the colossal heads provide fascinating insights into the physical appearance and cultural practices of the Olmec elite. Some heads display evidence of deliberate cranial modification, a practice in which the skulls of infants were shaped using boards and bindings to create elongated or flattened profiles that marked individuals as members of the ruling class. Others show evidence of dental modification, with teeth filed into specific patterns or inlaid with precious stones as marks of status and spiritual power. The diversity of these features suggests that Olmec society included people of different ethnic backgrounds, possibly reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of their major centers. The headdresses depicted on the colossal heads were clearly objects of extraordinary complexity and value, incorporating elements that would have required the skills of multiple specialized craftsmen to create. Archaeological evidence suggests that these headdresses included featherwork, jade ornaments, obsidian mirrors, and other precious materials that were arranged in specific patterns with deep symbolic meaning. The creation of such elaborate regalia would have required months of work by teams of artists and craftsmen, representing investments of wealth and labor that only the most powerful rulers could command. The distribution of colossal heads across different Olmec sites raises fascinating questions about their original purpose and meaning. Some heads appear to have been deliberately buried or hidden, possibly during periods of political upheaval or religious transformation. Others show evidence of having been moved from their original locations, suggesting that they may have been considered portable symbols of authority or sacred power. The fact that no two heads are identical implies that they were not mass-produced religious icons, but rather commemorative portraits created for specific occasions or individuals. The burial of colossal heads appears to have been a deliberate ritual act rather than simple abandonment or destruction. Archaeological evidence suggests that these massive sculptures were carefully interred using specific procedures that mirror burial practices for human remains. The heads were often accompanied by offerings of jade, obsidian, and other precious materials, suggesting that they were treated as living beings capable of receiving gifts and maintaining relationships with the world of the living. This practice of monument burial became a recurring theme in Mesoamerican culture, with later civilizations regularly burying or destroying the monuments of their predecessors as part of political and religious transformations. The movement of colossal heads from their original locations required the same massive organizational efforts that were involved in their initial creation and transportation. The decision to relocate these monuments would have been made only under extraordinary circumstances, possibly reflecting changes in political control or religious beliefs that required the reassignment of these powerful symbols. The fact that some heads were moved multiple times suggests that they retained their significance and power long after their original creation, continuing to serve as important elements in the political and religious landscape of Olmec civilization. The artistic style of the colossal heads established aesthetic principles that would influence Mesoamerican sculpture for centuries to come. The Olmec mastered the art of combining naturalistic representation with symbolic meaning, creating works that were both recognizably human and powerfully spiritual. They developed sophisticated techniques for suggesting volume and mass within the constraints of working with stone, achieving effects of three-dimensional modeling that would not be surpassed until the classical period of Maya art. Their understanding of proportion and symmetry created a sense of monumental dignity that enhanced the authority and presence of their subjects. The naturalistic elements of the colossal heads demonstrate the Olmec artists' careful observation of human anatomy and their ability to translate these observations into stone. The subtle modeling of facial muscles, the accurate representation of bone structure, and the convincing depiction of soft tissues like lips and eyelids all testify to the artist's intimate knowledge of human form. At the same time, these naturalistic elements were combined with symbolic features that transformed the portraits into representations of supernatural power and divine authority. The symbolic elements incorporated into the colossal heads drew upon a rich vocabulary of religious and political imagery that was shared throughout Olmec culture. The distinctive helmet-like headdresses often incorporated motifs associated with specific deities or supernatural forces, identifying the portrayed individuals with particular aspects of divine power. The facial expressions were carefully crafted to convey specific emotional and spiritual states, from the fierce concentration of the warrior to the serene wisdom of the priest-king. These symbolic elements transformed the heads from simple portraits into complex statements about the nature of political and religious authority. Beyond the colossal heads, Olmec artists created an extraordinary range of sculptural works that demonstrate their mastery of different materials and techniques. They carved intricate figures from jade, serpentine, and other precious stones, creating miniature masterpieces that rivaled their monumental works in artistic achievement. These smaller sculptures often depicted supernatural beings, shamanic transformations, and mythological scenes that provide insights into Olmec religious beliefs and practices. The level of detail achieved in these works is astounding, with some jade figurines no larger than a human hand containing dozens of precisely carved elements. The miniature sculptures created by Olmec artists were marvels of technical achievement that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with Stone Age technology. Working with materials like jade and serpentine that rank among the hardest substances known to ancient craftsmen, Olmec artists created objects with details measured in fractions of millimeters. They carved hollow figures with walls so thin that light could pass through them, created moving parts that articulated with precision mechanical joints, and achieved surface finishes so smooth that they seemed to have been created by modern machine tools. The subjects depicted in Olmec miniature sculpture provide a window into the rich mythological and religious traditions of their culture. Many figures represent shamanic transformations, showing human beings in the process of changing into jaguars, birds, or other supernatural creatures. These transformation scenes illustrate the Olmec belief that specially trained individuals could cross the boundaries between the human and supernatural worlds, gaining access to powers and knowledge that were normally beyond mortal reach. The precise depiction of these transformation processes suggests that the Olmec had developed detailed understanding of the stages and mechanisms involved in shamanic practice. Other miniature sculptures depict scenes from Olmec mythology, showing gods and supernatural beings engaged in cosmic dramas that explain the origins of the world and the relationships between different natural forces. These mythological scenes often involve complex interactions between multiple figures, requiring artists to compose intricate narrative tableaux within the constraints of small-scale sculpture. The ability to convey complex stories through purely visual means demonstrates the sophisticated symbolic thinking that characterized Olmec culture and their deep understanding of the relationship between art and communication. The Olmec developed a sophisticated symbolic vocabulary that appears consistently across their artistic productions, from colossal sculptures to tiny jade ornaments. Central to this symbolic system was the figure of the word jaguar, a supernatural being that combined human and feline characteristics and appears to have served as a primary deity in the Olmec pantheon. This figure appears in countless variations throughout Olmec art, sometimes as a snarling infant with jaguar features, sometimes as a powerful adult figure with clawed hands and fanged mouth, and sometimes as abstract symbols that reduce the jaguar essence to its most essential elements. The word jaguar represents one of the most complex and important concepts in Olmec religious thought, embodying the union of human intelligence with animal power that was central to shamanic practice. The jaguar was the most powerful predator in the Mesoamerican environment, a creature capable of moving silently through the forest, swimming across rivers, and climbing into the canopy to hunt. These abilities made the jaguar a perfect symbol for the shaman, who needed to be equally at home in different realms of existence and capable of accessing powers that were normally beyond human reach. The infant were jaguars that appear frequently in Olmec art may represent the offspring of unions between human women and jaguar gods, supernatural beings who possessed the combined powers of both species from birth. These figures often display expressions of fierce intelligence that suggest awareness of their dual nature and their destined role as intermediaries between the human and supernatural worlds. The prominence of infant were jaguars in Olmec art may reflect beliefs about the special spiritual significance of children who displayed unusual abilities or characteristics. The adult were jaguar figures in Olmec art typically represent fully transformed shamans or deities who have achieved complete mastery over their dual nature. These figures often display elaborate regalia and ornaments that mark their status as divine or semi-divine beings, including jade ornaments, feathered headdresses, and ceremonial weapons. The artistic treatment of these figures emphasizes their supernatural power while maintaining enough human characteristics to make them recognizable as transformed beings rather than pure animals. The jaguar held profound significance in Olmec cosmology as the lord of the underworld and the source of shamanic power. Jaguars were the most powerful predators in the Mesoamerican environment, capable of moving between the terrestrial world of the forest floor and the aquatic realm of rivers and swamps. This ability to cross boundaries between different realms made the jaguar a perfect symbol for shamanic transformation and spiritual power. Olmec rulers and priests appear to have identified themselves with jaguars, adopting jaguar names and wearing jaguar costumes during important ceremonies. The underworld associations of the jaguar were based on the animal's nocturnal habits and its preference for caves and other dark places as daytime resting spots. The Olmec understood caves as entrances to the underworld, sacred spaces where the boundaries between different levels of existence became permeable. Jaguars that lived in caves were seen as guardians of these supernatural portals, beings who controlled access to the realm of the dead and the sources of agricultural fertility that lay beneath the earth. The aquatic associations of the jaguar reflected the animal's unusual swimming ability and its tendency to hunt along riverbanks and in swampy areas. The Olmecs saw this behavior as evidence of the jaguar's connection to the water spirits who controlled rainfall and agricultural fertility. Shamans who could transform into jaguars were believed to gain access to these water spirits, allowing them to influence weather patterns and ensure adequate rainfall for their communities. This connection between jaguars and water became a central theme in Olmec religious art, with many jaguar figures incorporating aquatic symbols and motifs. The artistic representation of jaguar symbolism evolved throughout the history of Olmec civilization, becoming increasingly abstract and stylized over time. Early jaguar figures were relatively naturalistic, clearly recognizable as feline forms with human characteristics. Later representations became more symbolic, reducing the jaguar to essential elements like claws, fangs, and spotted patterns that could be incorporated into a wide range of artistic contexts. This evolution toward abstraction demonstrates the sophistication of Olmec artistic thinking and their ability to distill complex religious concepts into powerful visual symbols. The abstraction of jaguar symbolism allowed Olmec artists to incorporate these powerful images into architectural elements, decorative patterns, and personal ornaments where naturalistic representations would have been impractical or inappropriate. Jaguar claws became decorative elements on pottery and textiles. Jaguar spots were incorporated into geometric patterns that covered large architectural surfaces, and jaguar fangs were stylized into symbols that could be carved on small jade ornaments. This flexibility in symbolic representation allowed jaguar imagery to permeate all aspects of Olmec visual culture. The evolution of jaguar symbolism also reflected changing religious concepts and practices within Olmec society. As Olmec civilization became more complex and hierarchical, the jaguar transformed from a symbol of shamanic power accessible to many individuals into a more exclusive emblem of royal and priestly authority. The most elaborate jaguar imagery became associated with the highest levels of political and religious leadership, while simpler jaguar symbols continued to be used in more general religious contexts. Water symbolism played an equally important role in Olmec art and religious thought. Living in the tropical lowlands where water was both life-giving and potentially destructive, the Olmec developed complex beliefs about the spiritual significance of rivers, rain, and the sea. They created elaborate artistic representations of water deities, often combining serpentine forms with aquatic imagery to suggest the flowing, transformative power of water. These water spirits were believed to control agricultural fertility and were central to the ceremonies performed at major religious centers. The serpentine forms associated with water deities in Olmec art reflected the visual similarity between flowing water and the movement of snakes, as well as the symbolic connection between serpents and the life-giving power of water. Olmec artists developed sophisticated techniques for depicting the fluid motion of both water and serpents, creating sculptures and relief carvings that seemed to capture these elements in motion. The combination of serpentine and aquatic imagery created powerful symbols that conveyed the dynamic, ever-changing nature of water and its central role in the cycles of life and death. The seasonal flooding that affected the Olmec heartland provided dramatic evidence of water's dual nature as both creator and destroyer. The annual floods brought fertile silt that renewed agricultural lands, but also posed constant threats to human settlements and stored food supplies. The Olmec developed elaborate ceremonies designed to influence these flood cycles, seeking to maximize the benefits of flooding while minimizing its destructive potential. These ceremonies often involved the sacrifice of precious objects to water spirits, including jade ornaments and elaborate featherwork that were cast into rivers or buried in specially prepared pools. The rain ceremonies of the Olmec were among their most important religious observances, involving entire communities in elaborate rituals designed to ensure adequate precipitation for agricultural success. These ceremonies were timed to coincide with the beginning of the rainy season and involved processions, dances, and offerings that could continue for days or weeks. The artistic representations of these ceremonies show participants wearing elaborate costumes that transform them into water spirits, jaguars, and other supernatural beings associated with rainfall and agricultural fertility. The Olmec mastery of jade working represents one of their most remarkable artistic achievements. Jade was the most precious material in Mesoamerican culture, valued more highly than gold for its symbolic associations with water, fertility, and eternal life. The Olmec developed sophisticated techniques for working this extremely hard stone, creating objects of extraordinary beauty and precision. They understood the different varieties of jade and their properties, selecting specific types for different purposes and achieving effects of color and translucency that enhanced the spiritual power of their creations. The sources of jade used by the Olmec were located primarily in the highlands of Guatemala and the Motagua River Valley, requiring extensive trade networks to transport raw materials to the Gulf Coast workshops where they were transformed into finished objects. The journey from jade source to finished artwork involved multiple stages of processing and refinement, with rough blocks being initially shaped at highland workshops before being transported to coastal centers for final carving and polishing. This complex supply chain required sophisticated organization and quality control to ensure that only the finest materials reached the master craftsmen who created the most important pieces. The techniques developed by Olmec jade workers pushed the boundaries of what was possible with Stone Age technology. They learned to exploit the natural fracture patterns in jade to split large blocks into smaller working pieces, minimizing waste and maximizing the yield of precious material. They developed drilling techniques that could create perfectly circular holes through solid jade, using hollow reed drills charged with abrasive compounds to achieve precision that rivals modern machine work. Most remarkably, they mastered the art of creating hollow jade objects with walls so thin that light could pass through them, demonstrating technical skills that would not be equaled until the development of modern lapidary equipment. Olmec jade working required not only technical skill, but also deep knowledge of the stone's symbolic meanings and ritual uses. Different colors of jade carried different spiritual associations, with blue-green stones representing water and sky, while darker varieties symbolized the earth and underworld. The Olmec created jade objects in forms that reflected these symbolic associations, carving water birds from blue jade, earth spirits from dark green stone, and solar symbols from lighter, more translucent varieties. The precision of their carving techniques allowed them to create incredibly detailed miniature sculptures that packed enormous symbolic meaning into small objects. The ritual uses of jade objects in Olmec ceremonies required specific procedures and protocols that were closely guarded by the priestly class. Different types of jade objects were used in different ceremonies, with some reserved for the most important religious festivals and others used in daily ritual observances. The placement of jade objects within ceremonial contexts was governed by complex rules that took into account the color, size, and symbolic meaning of each piece, as well as its relationship to other ritual objects and the specific deities being honored. The distribution of Olmec jade objects across Mesoamerica provides evidence for the extensive trade networks that connected the Olmec heartland with distant regions. Jade sources were located primarily in the highlands of Guatemala and southern Mexico, far from the Olmec centers in the Gulf Coast lowlands. The presence of finished jade objects in Olmec sites demonstrates their ability to obtain raw materials from distant sources and transform them into works of art that enhance their prestige and spiritual authority. The discovery of Olmec-style jade objects in sites throughout Mesoamerica shows how these precious artifacts served as vehicles for spreading Olmec cultural influence. The trade networks that supplied jade to Olmec craftsmen were part of larger commercial systems that connected diverse regions of Mesoamerica in relationships of mutual dependence and cultural exchange. These networks carried not only raw materials but also finished goods, technological innovations, and cultural practices that contributed to the remarkable uniformity of certain aspects of Mesoamerican civilization. The Olmec position at the center of these trade networks gave them access to resources and ideas from across the region, contributing to their cultural dynamism and creative achievements. The religious and cosmological beliefs that inspired Olmec art were based on a sophisticated understanding of natural cycles and cosmic principles. The Olmec observed the movements of celestial bodies and incorporated astronomical knowledge into their artistic productions, creating works that served both aesthetic and calendrical functions. They developed complex mythologies that explained the origins of the world and the relationships between different supernatural forces, stories that were encoded in their artistic productions and passed down through generations of artists and priests. Central to Olmec cosmology was the concept of cyclical time, the belief that history repeated itself in great cycles of creation and destruction. This understanding of time was reflected in their artistic productions, which often depicted scenes of transformation, death, and rebirth. The Olmec believed that human actions could influence these cosmic cycles, and their art served as a means of maintaining harmony between the human and supernatural worlds. Rulers and priests used artistic objects as tools for communicating with the gods and ensuring the continued prosperity of their communities. The creation myths of the Olmec described the world as emerging from a primordial sea through the actions of supernatural beings who possessed the combined characteristics of humans, animals, and natural forces. These creation stories were depicted in elaborate artistic compositions that showed the cosmic drama unfolding through multiple episodes and transformations. The artistic representation of these myths required sophisticated narrative techniques that could convey complex stories through purely visual means, demonstrating the high level of symbolic thinking that characterized Olmec culture. The cyclical nature of time in Olmec cosmology was reflected in their artistic treatment of themes like death and rebirth, seasonal change, and the eternal return of cosmic patterns. Many Olmec artworks depict scenes of transformation in which beings change from one form to another, illustrating the belief that all existence was characterized by constant change and renewal. These transformation scenes often show the moment of change itself, capturing the dynamic process through which old forms give way to new ones in the eternal cycle of cosmic renewal. The influence of Olmec artistic traditions extended far beyond their original homeland, spreading throughout Mesoamerica and establishing aesthetic principles that would guide artistic production for centuries to come. The Olmec development of monumental sculpture inspired later civilizations to create their own colossal works. From the massive stone heads of Easter Island to the giant statues of ancient Egypt, their mastery of jade working provided the technical foundation for the sophisticated lapidary traditions of the Maya and other later cultures. Most importantly, their integration of artistic production with religious and political authority established patterns that would characterize Mesoamerican civilization throughout its long history. The artistic legacy of the Olmec can be seen in the works of every subsequent Mesoamerican civilization. Maya sculptors adopted Olmec techniques for working with stone and jade, while incorporating their own innovations in relief carving and architectural sculpture. The great murals of Teotihuacan show clear influences from Olmec artistic traditions, particularly in their use of symbolic imagery and their integration of human and animal forms. Even the Aztecs, who lived more than a millennium after the decline of Olmec civilization, incorporated Olmec artistic elements into their own cultural productions and regarded the ancient Olmec as the source of all civilized arts. The cosmic vision that guided Olmec artistic production was based on their understanding of the universe as a living, interconnected system in which all elements were related through complex webs of spiritual and material relationships. This holistic worldview influenced every aspect of their artistic production, from the selection of raw materials to the final placement of finished works within sacred contexts. The Olmec did not create art for its own sake, but as a means of participating in the cosmic order and maintaining the delicate balance between human society and the natural world. The decline of the great Olmec centers around 400 BCE marked the end of the first phase of Mesoamerican civilization, but their cultural achievements had already established foundations that would support the development of even greater civilizations in later periods. The artistic traditions they created, the religious concepts they developed, and the technological innovations they pioneered provided the building blocks for the remarkable cultural flowering that would characterize Mesoamerica for the next 2 millennia. Their vision of art as a sacred activity that connected human creativity with cosmic principles would inspire generations of artists and craftsmen throughout the region, ensuring that the Olmec legacy would endure long after their great ceremonial centers had been reclaimed by the jungle. The influence of Olmec civilization extended far beyond their immediate geographical boundaries, creating ripple effects that would shape Mesoamerican culture for millennia to come. Their sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering became foundational knowledge that subsequent civilizations would build upon, adapt, and refine. The great ceremonial centers they constructed served not merely as religious focal points, but as repositories of accumulated wisdom, where generations of scholars, priests, and artisans gathered to preserve and transmit essential knowledge. Archaeological evidence suggests that Olmec traders and diplomats traveled vast distances, establishing networks that connected diverse communities across the region. These connections facilitated not only the exchange of goods and materials, but also the transmission of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. The distinctive Olmec artistic style, characterized by its bold geometric patterns and naturalistic representations, can be traced in the archaeological record of communities hundreds of miles from the traditional Olmec heartland, testament to the far-reaching influence of their cultural innovations. The agricultural techniques developed by the Olmec proved particularly influential in shaping regional food production systems. Their sophisticated understanding of crop rotation, irrigation, and soil management enabled them to support large populations in areas that might otherwise have been considered marginal for intensive agriculture. These innovations were gradually adopted by neighboring communities, leading to increased food security and population growth throughout the region. The surplus agricultural production made possible by these techniques also freed up human resources for specialized crafts, trade, and intellectual pursuits, contributing to the overall cultural flowering of Mesoamerican civilization. Religious and ceremonial practices pioneered by the Olmec became integral components of later Mesoamerican belief systems. Their complex cosmology, which incorporated sophisticated astronomical observations and mathematical calculations, provided a framework for understanding the relationship between human society and the natural world. The ritual calendar they developed, with its intricate system of interlocking cycles, became a standard reference point for organizing religious ceremonies, agricultural activities, and social events throughout the region. This temporal framework helped create a sense of shared cultural identity among diverse communities, even as they maintained their own distinct local traditions. The Olmec approach to urban planning and architecture established principles that would influence city design throughout Mesoamerica for centuries. Their understanding of how to organize space to facilitate both practical activities and ceremonial functions became a template that later civilizations would adapt to their own needs and circumstances. The integration of residential areas, craft workshops, administrative buildings, and religious structures within carefully planned urban environments demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how physical space could be used to reinforce social hierarchies and cultural values. Trade networks established by the Olmec created economic relationships that persisted long after their civilization had declined. The routes they pioneered continued to serve as conduits for commerce, connecting distant communities and facilitating the exchange of both essential goods and luxury items. These established pathways became the foundation for later commercial networks that would span the entire Mesoamerican region, creating economic interdependencies that helped maintain cultural connections even during periods of political fragmentation. The artistic traditions established by the Olmec continue to evolve and develop in the hands of subsequent generations of craftsmen and artists. Their techniques for working with jade, obsidian, and other precious materials became standard practices that were refined and elaborated upon by later civilizations. The symbolic vocabulary they developed, with its rich array of mythological figures and cosmological references, provided a common language of meaning that could be understood and interpreted by diverse communities throughout the region. Educational systems pioneered by the Olmec, which emphasized the transmission of practical skills alongside religious and cultural knowledge, became models for training future generations of leaders, craftsmen, and specialists. Their approach to education, which combined formal instruction with hands-on experience, proved highly effective in preserving and transmitting complex bodies of knowledge across generations. This educational framework ensured that essential skills and cultural traditions would not be lost, even during periods of social upheaval or political transition. The Olmec understanding of medicine and healing practices contributed significantly to the development of regional medical traditions. Their knowledge of medicinal plants, surgical techniques, and therapeutic practices was preserved and transmitted through networks of healers and medical practitioners. This medical knowledge, combined with their sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and physiology, laid the groundwork for the advanced medical systems that would later emerge in other Mesoamerican civilizations. Environmental management practices developed by the Olmec demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of sustainable resource utilization. Their methods for managing forests, waterways, and agricultural lands showed how human communities could thrive while maintaining ecological balance. These practices became particularly important as regional populations grew and placed increasing demands on natural resources. The Olmec example provided a blueprint for sustainable development that helped ensure the long-term viability of human settlement in the region. The political and administrative systems pioneered by the Olmec established precedents for governance that would influence later Mesoamerican societies. Their methods for organizing large-scale public works projects, managing trade relationships, and coordinating religious ceremonies demonstrated effective approaches to leadership and administration. These governmental innovations provided models that could be adapted to different social and environmental contexts while maintaining essential functions of coordination and control. As Olmec civilization gradually declined, their cultural achievements were not lost, but rather transformed and incorporated into the emerging traditions of successor societies. The process of cultural transmission was neither simple nor direct, but involved complex interactions between different groups, each contributing their own innovations and adaptations to the evolving Mesoamerican cultural matrix. This dynamic process of cultural exchange and development ensured that the most valuable aspects of Olmec civilization would continue to influence regional development for generations to come. The legacy of Olmec civilization thus represents not merely a historical curiosity, but a foundational chapter in the long story of Mesoamerican cultural development. Their innovations in art, architecture, agriculture, astronomy, and social organization provided essential building blocks that subsequent civilizations would use to construct their own remarkable achievements. The enduring influence of Olmec culture demonstrates the power of human creativity and ingenuity to transcend temporal and geographical boundaries, creating lasting contributions to the collective heritage of human civilization. In this way, the great ceremonial centers of the Olmec, though eventually reclaimed by the jungle, continued to exert their influence through the countless lives they had touched and the knowledge they had preserved. Their true monument was not built of stone and earth, but of ideas and innovations that would echo through the centuries, shaping the destiny of an entire region and contributing to the rich tapestry of human cultural achievement.